Eastern Bank has helped us finance housing that has provided over 300 affordable units. Because of Eastern, we're employing more people every day in the community. That's what makes us feel good about what we do.
My parents decided to open a store in Chelsea that reminded them of their home in Cuba. When Eastern Bank helped us secure the financing, it really catapulted our business to another level. When there's something that's so important, Eastern Bank was there for us and held our hand all the way to the end.
Welcome everyone to our virtual conversation on empowering entrepreneurs of color. My name is Shirley Leung. I'm a columnist at the Boston Globe. I'll be moderating your panel today and we'll be joined by a great group of panelists. This topic about empowering entrepreneurs of color, it's always been an important one, but more so today as this country goes through a racial reckoning. A lot of people, a lot of companies are asking, what can I do? And we know we have to do more because the pandemic-induced downturn has disproportionately hurt minority-owned businesses, and they're most vulnerable to closing permanently. These are the businesses that went into the pandemic with little cash on hand, and it's very difficult for them to get through the bad times. I'm going to introduce Quincy Miller very soon from Eastern Bank, but let me give you a little bit more about what's been going on with minority-owned businesses during the pandemic. Consider this analysis done by the Federal Bank of New York. It showed that Black-owned businesses during the pandemic experienced the most decline, with a 41% drop in activity. That's followed by Latinx business owners, which experienced a 32% decline, and activity among Asian American business owners dropped by 26%. In contrast, the activity of white business owners fell by 17%. So there's a lot of work to be done here. And before we jump into our conversation, I have Quincy Miller to my, I don't know if it's the left or right, but you're right there, right? He's the president of Eastern Bank, and Eastern Bank is today's sponsor, and he'll provide some opening remarks. Now, I've known Quincy for years, but I've gotten to know him a lot better during the pandemic. You keep showing up in my stories, whether it's about banks like Eastern working literally round the clock to get its customers PPP loans, to how Black and Brown executives want to take the lead on helping Boston eliminate systemic racism. So Quincy, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Shirley. Thank you for that very kind introduction. And really thank you for the inspiring work that you've done at the Boston Globe. Your reporting has helped pave the way for companies and individuals to consider more meaningful action in addressing systemic racism and racial inequality all around us, to open opportunities like today's discussion around empowering entrepreneurs of color. Of course, I also want to thank the Boston Globe for hosting this dialogue. We at Eastern are proud to support this town hall. We're also incredibly proud of today's speakers, who we consider our partners in the community. And while I'm going to share a few remarks about Eastern, I would be remiss without thanking them for their critically important work with entrepreneurs of color, especially during these difficult times. I'll leave them to elaborate further, but suffice to say, Eastern is especially excited to bring them together for this conversation. Since Eastern's founding 202 years ago, we've been committed to serving our customers, colleagues, and our community. And we realize that that mission of uplifting our customers and colleagues and community is now even more important than ever. As we have in the past, in good times and in bad, we're stepping up in many ways. I mention this as food for thought for today's listeners. Whether through our companies, our neighborhoods, or ourselves, there is room for all of us to help to drive better outcomes, especially for our entrepreneurs. At Eastern, throughout every step of the way, we've been focused on assisting small businesses, helping them in identifying their cash management solutions that are right for their business, and to provide lending and products to help them grow. We're the #1 SBA lender in New England for 10 years running. And during this pandemic, yet again, we knew we had to step up even more. Through the Payroll Protection Program, we worked around the clock, as Shirley mentioned, to be able to secure PPP loans for over 8,000 customers and non-customers in our communities, totaling approximately $1.1 billion in critical funding to keep people employed. Our mantra was every loan that we secured meant that that business could keep their employees on the payroll and allow that family to keep food on their table. This, together with our $5 million small business emergency relief program through COVID, was just two ways that we've been able to support our business customers through this pandemic. But in addition to our banking service, Eastern is proud to put our philanthropy to use in the communities to also support not only COVID, but driving systemic change around economic mobility and inclusion, addressing the wealth gap. We have long recognized the need for more focused and significant effort towards addressing these racial disparities. Through that, we established the Foundation for Business Equity almost 3.5 years ago, now led by, and really since that point, led by our executive director, Glenn Lloyd, and that was really focused on addressing the widening income and wealth gap in Greater Boston. It really was a created, and it is a created integrated ecosystem providing capital, capacity building, more flexible capital, and greater access to contracts to scale Black and Latinx businesses within our region. Now, much like the discrepancies that we see in capacity and resources for Black and Latinx small businesses, these also exist in the nonprofit world as well. As the average Black-led nonprofits, unrestricted net assets are 76% smaller than that of white-led nonprofits. To address these disparities and systemic racism, the new Commonwealth Racial Equity and Social Justice Fund was formed, of which both myself and Malia Lazu, one of our panelists, helped to fund and found, and with support of our organization stepping up in a major way. This fund, a first of its kind, was established by a coalition of 19 Black and Brown executive leaders across the Commonwealth for the sole purpose of leveraging our resources to help raise at least $100 million and invest in underserved communities, community organizations fighting for this change every day on the ground, and to once and for all drive transformational societal changes needed to address systemic racism and racial inequity across the Commonwealth. As with nonprofits, our Black and Brown small businesses can't succeed alone in this world of systemic racism. We must support and empower them, and it's time to have some real talk conversations, and that's what we're here today to have. So I'm excited for these panelists to help us understand how we can all do better, how we can all do more to ensure our small businesses and their communities not only survive this pandemic, not only do better, but thrive for generations to come. Now I'll hand it back over to Shirley to introduce our panelists and get the conversation started. Shirley?
Thank you, Quizzy, and thank you for your leadership and Eastern's Bank commitment to helping entrepreneurs of color. I'm gonna just go by alphabetical order. So we have John Barrows. Is John gonna magically appear? Oh, there you are. John Barrows is the Chief of Economic Development for the City of Boston. Hi, John. We have next Nia Evans. She's the Executive Director of the Boston UDEMA Project, a cooperative finance, business, and arts ecosystem, including the UDEMA Fund, the nation's first democratically governed investment fund. We're going to learn a little bit more about that effort as later on. We have Bea Jimenez. She's the Director. Where's Bea? Oh, there you are. You're the Director of Economic Opportunity for the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. And then we have Malia Lazu. There you are. She's the Regional President and Chief Experience Culture Officer for Berkshire Bank. Now I have my own questions that to give to our panelists. The audience has also submitted some pre-submitted some questions, so I have those in hand. But if you want to submit questions during the panel, please use your Q&A function on Zoom. I think the chat function has been turned off, so use the Q&A. Anyways, one of the goals today is to leave the audience with a to-do list and give them actionable items that they can do on their own or take back to their organizations. So one of the things I want to start off talking about is if you could talk about one thing your organization has done during the pandemic to help entrepreneurs of color during this time, and why you think that has been critical to them staying afloat. Who wants to start? Don't jump all up at once.
I'll start, Shirley. Hi, good morning. I was going to say good afternoon, but it's morning. Good morning, everyone. Once again, my name is Nia Evans. I'm with Boston UDEMA Project. I'm our executive director. Thank you for inviting UDEMA on the panel, and just want to shout out my fellow panelists. We know each other and like each other in real life, so just want to make sure I shout you all out. I'll jump into it. So I would say before the pandemic, we were very attuned to relationships. So the one word that I'm going to use, if there were a one word answer, I would say relationships. During the pandemic, we focused on deepening and relying on those relationships. So the relationships we focused on are the relationships with our members, our peers in the space, such as Malia and Bea and Glenn Lloyd with FBE, Karen Kelleher at LISC Boston, Shagun Idowu at Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, just as an example, and our businesses. And so I would say as a result of these relationships with our businesses, for example, we were able to hear directly from them what their particular unique needs were. And then we were able to rely on those relationships to meet those needs. So that ranged from capital to advice on the unemployment insurance to advertising, open positions. We participated in coalitions, which included placing our businesses in front of other lenders and investors, such as Berkshire Bank. Somalia was instrumental in that, for example, providing assistance with PPP and various grant programs. That's where our relationship with LISC Boston came into effect, for example, acting as a trusted reference for those grant programs, uplifting the importance of small business grants. And this was following the lead of Commonwealth Kitchen. And I always like to mention names of people that we work with because I believe in giving credit where credit is due. And then ourselves providing no strings attached cash out of an emergency fund that we set up for our businesses workers. And so we think that our attention to deep relationships has created a close, easily accessible community for our businesses to reach out to. No hoops, no hurdles, no unnecessary bureaucracy for their various needs. And then I would say more importantly, a community that includes other businesses in our network, our peers and our members, who are all consumers, by the way, and who are all rooting and rallying for our businesses. So our businesses know that when they reach out to us, we will not provide distant advice, but rather we will partner with them, brainstorm with them. Our members will partner with them to problem solve and to employ as much creativity as possible for them to thrive. So I would say in terms of a to-do list, for example, for our audience, one thing that I can say is we have a business support team, which is a member-led team. It meets once a month. There's where we provide a space, again, for the businesses in our networks, our members, our peers, TA providers, so that we have multiple stakeholders in one place. They're equal in relationship. There's no one expertise that's valued over the other, and they're working together on behalf of these businesses.
Great, thank you. John, the city's been so busy. Talk a little bit about what you've done. I mean, I feel like every week you're rolling out something new for small businesses.
Thanks, Shirley. And I just want to first thank the Globe for hosting this. And I want to thank Quincy and his leadership and Eastern Bank. And just want to shout out all the panelists for all that you guys have been doing. This is just a crazy time. And Shirley, it feels like we've been rolling things out, but man, it just feels like we need more and more. I mean, people are in dire straits out there. As soon as this happened, businesses called us and we were hearing from people. And the biggest fear and the biggest response we were trying to figure out was money. Financial assistance, capital assistance was the most important thing. People said it early. And as I was talking to, and Frank, I had a lot of conversations with Eastern Bank, and the feds were talking about their financial release. There was real clear concerns early on that our smallest, most vulnerable, most diverse businesses weren't going to get touched with some of that financial relief. So we quickly decided that we needed to put together a quick fund. And so we did a small business relief fund. It was super important. We try to get as much money out as quick as possible. I actually got in trouble with some of my employees. I think I was asking them to work too many hours, so I had to back off a little bit. We got about $6.5 million out to the smallest of Boston's businesses. 70% of that money went to businesses with 5 employees or less, 51% to businesses that are owned by people who are brown and black. It was critical, right, that we quickly do that. The other piece to that was important was making sure we had technical assistance for people who were trying to get any kind of financial assistance anywhere else, right? So we continue to hear, oh my God, how do I get to that kind of a fund over here? How do I apply for the PPP? What the heck is the EDIL? And, and so things were changing so rapidly. And so technical assistance was important. We partnered with some lawyers because it got really legal really quickly about what people were sharing, not sharing, what forms they needed to get, et cetera. We hosted a call. We still host a call every week. Every Tuesday, we host a call at 3 o'clock with businesses in our city. We make sure we host workshops in other languages. It was huge to provide language access for small business owners, as many of our small business owners are immigrants. In fact, of the Reopen Boston Fund, 53% of those we provided funding are immigrant or naturalized citizens. That's a huge number. So we had to get out money quickly, and then we had to try to find as much technical assistance. Nia was right, relationships matter, that people can trust you enough to talk about how to get assistance from other places, and those things were important.
Bay or Milena, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'll add that I think we're all saying, and even just all of us, Quincy included, being in relationship with each other and with the communities that we're in relationship with really allowed us to very quickly, sort of create a united front and, put out the fires you were seeing and report back, right? One of the things that we were the most proud of is that we were able to put together a line of credit that was, low. You didn't have to have a high credit score. You didn't have to have cash on hand or put up personal collateral. And it was up to $50,000 for businesses who were coming through BECMA, Amplify Latinx, and the LGBTQ chamber. And that was a response actually from getting a call from Grace and from Shagun, who were like, we need help now. We know the government's doing something and we'll need help with that as well. And what I like about this product is, it's low interest, it's a set rate, but it's also a line of credit. So it allows a business to, not only have a loan pay back and then, be out of that capital, but have access to that capital moving forward. And ultimately, I think, one of the things that we can do as a bank and all banks should be looking at doing, and Eastern is doing amazingly, is to figure out how do we get people into traditional banking products, because that's where folks are the most protected and where they'll have the most access. So being poor is expensive, and if we can get folks into traditional banking products, they'll have the same access that we all have.
I want to move on. Can I move on and move on to the next question? And Bay, I want you to answer first. Is that okay? Is that a good deal? Anyways, we know entrepreneurs of color face barriers white counterparts do not. That's true if you are starting a tech company or opening a restaurant. And I wanted each of you to talk about what is the biggest barrier this community faces, and how do we, in this moment, once and for all, knock down that barrier. And Bay, I was hoping you could start us off on that conversation, because you thought of something that I didn't even think about.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Thank you to the Boston Globe for hosting this conversation. And thank you to the leadership of Eastern Bank and everyone in the virtual room. I'm excited to be here. So you asked what the biggest barrier for Boston is. I would say it's the perception and the reality of it looking and being a racist city. I think too often for people who look like myself, Afro-Dominican, and I think it often feels like there's a different set of rules to make it in the city, whether that's finding a good first job straight out of college or brokering your first deal with a corporation as an entrepreneur of color. I think it's just too hard, and unfortunately, it's a perception and a reality that continues to hinder us. One of the ways that we've started to look at this issue at the Chamber of Commerce is through our Fierce Urgency of Now Festival. So we celebrate Black and Brown professionals, young leaders of color in our city who have often felt on the margins and who are now standing up and saying, we are here, we are visible, and you need to pay attention to us. That's one of the ways that we're looking at it. And I really hope and have hope that by finding more ways to bring visibility to young Black and Brown professionals, that we can really start to say that the future of Boston is in color.
Okay, I'll go next. So thank you, Bea, and Shirley, thank you very much. I really appreciate this question. And so I want to draw attention to a key phrase, moment of racial reckoning. And I think when we think about this, what has brought this current moment of racial reckoning, it was America being a captive audience as a result of the pandemic and being unable to turn away from a man's murder, which is racially motivated. And so I think that's important. And the reckoning is that where it was possible for some people to deny or rationalize this reality before, it's now become irrefutable. And that's our wider society. And I think it's tempting to look at entrepreneurship and to look at the business world to think numbers and to think it's cut and dry and presume a rationality or objectivity that isn't there. And so I think this is very important. So when we regard a credit score, for example, or questions on a loan application or a bid for a job as neutral metrics, I think we should recognize they're not. And we're making a mistake when we move as if they are. And so Quincy talked about this in his opening. We're having conversations about the history of redlining, which is racial discrimination in housing and lending, police killings that are racially motivated. He referenced the Bridgespan, I think it was a Bridgespan study on racial discrimination in the nonprofit sector that results in Black-led nonprofits particularly receiving disproportionately less funding than white-led nonprofits. I think it should occur to us that of course this racial discrimination is going to be present in entrepreneurship as well. However, up until recent times, these conversations have focused on what entrepreneurs of color are supposedly not doing, supposedly don't know how to do, and what they don't have. So they presume a lack of skills and knowledge that may or may not be there. So it's not to say it's definitely not there, but the presumption, the underlying presumption is that they are not there. So typically we talk about technical assistance, we talk about bookkeeping, we talk about business planning. We do this ad nauseum, and we ignore the racial discrimination, that both historical and contemporary, that undergirds the environment that entrepreneurs work in. And so what this means is if they do acquire capital, it's at a higher cost. Customers are harder to acquire and keep, and failures, this is important, are harder to bounce back from. Everyone fails. We're not allowed to fail, even as we even as success is made pretty hard. And so I think because we're just starting to explicitly talk about the role of racial discrimination, entrepreneurs of color have for a long time suffered from a negative perception that again presumes deficiencies and erects hurdles, a lack of faith, a lack of trust, a lack of the benefit of the doubt, and a lack of whole communities rallying behind them. So if I were to tweak your question a little bit, I think it's important to focus on what's not been talked about enough. And so I would say the largest unaddressed barrier for entrepreneurs of color is the role of racial discrimination in their lives. And I think one way that we set out to intentionally eradicate that is to start to examine the doubts. So a credit score doesn't meet a particular level. What's the comprehensive story? What does credit score even measure? It's supposed to measure trustworthiness. How do you actually ascertain the trustworthiness of a person? It's definitely not a number. So across the board, there are certain practices that we engage in that seem neutral and objective that we should be examining. We should no longer be engaging in them. If you think there isn't a market for a business, why not? Do you lack intimacy or cultural proficiency with that particular product or that customer? Who else should you be talking to? So I would say there should be there's a constant fundamental self-reflection and examination that should be happening in concert with what we're already doing. So it's not to say certain types of technical assistance and certain types of conversations are not important. It's to say we've been having them. We've been having these conversations. We've been doing this work. But what has been missing is eradicating the role of racial discrimination. And I think if we do that in concert with what we're already doing, then we will actually really be able to knock down the largest barrier once and for all.
Anybody else want to add anything?
Yeah, sure, Em. I think we're all waiting for you to sign and call us out. So we're trying to be disciplined. But let me just jump in here and say that to add on to that, and because of that, representation matters, right? And I want to shout out my two bank presidents here. It matters that Malia is a bank president, right? Not sure how Malia got from community organizing to bank president, but that's a different book she should write. My man Quincy at Eastern being a bank president, it matters. It matters that there's representation in government, right? It matters that I am a Black man and I get to make the final determination on the city's small business loans, right? I haven't done the study, but I'd venture to say there's probably more in Black, brown businesses that have gotten small business loans from the city, right? Now, that's not really a knock on my predecessor who used to do the loan. It really is about the assumptions that people make when they are underwriting, as Nia talked about, our businesses and entrepreneurs particularly. And I think my experience allows me to see it through a different lens. So the city of Boston has been far more aggressive in making sure that we are supporting brown and Black businesses. That's why we've stood up a website saying support brown and Black businesses in Boston. So there's a website now on our webpage at boston.gov/brown and Black businesses. Go there if you're a brown and Black business and register, and then go there if you're looking to support a brown and Black business in Boston. It's critical. It's critical that we no longer be race neutral. Our policies need to be race affirmative. We need to say in our policies what we are trying to do. Now, I know there's all types of legal stuff and we're all trying to push through and battle, but where we can, we need to be affirmative, which is why the mayor, a couple of years ago, when he instituted in our land disposition process, that every developer now that's going to build in public land needs to show up with their team and talk about how their team is diverse or not, right? And then in the first wave of them that came out of the BPDA, those developers didn't take it seriously, right? So we said, nope, if you can't answer that question, you can't do business with the city in building on our land. That is important. So we started and we reissued we're about to reissue all of those RFPs because we disqualified all of the respondents, right? If we don't have race affirmative policies, we're gonna continue to be impacted by the unconscious racial, or sometimes very conscious racism that exists as part of the institutional decisions that are being made in Boston and all over the country today.
Malia, you talked about in our kind of prep call, you talked about the lack of an infrastructure for entrepreneurs of color, and that being a big barrier to their success. Talk a little bit about that.
I think in Boston, and this is maybe where our Boston exceptionalism doesn't serve us, we actually don't understand that there's other cities where Black and brown businesses can thrive and where there's ecosystems that aren't just about, how do we get, the basic needs, right? Things like, the work, I would say that the work that Eastern and Berkshire Bank does is awesome, and it's helping Boston play catch up, right? When you look at other cities like Detroit, when you look at Atlanta, where you see a real infrastructure of people working together. And so, you have these formal and informal networks that in other cities, I think, work well together and with the city, So one of the things that we were talking about, as I saw it as someone who wasn't, in the banks at that time, but like liquor licenses, right? Like here's an idea and a moment where working with now Congresswoman Presley Squad Up, we were able to get 75 new liquor licenses that were targeted really for Black and Brown. As John said, like, you can't say specifically, right? You say, okay, we're going to do it in these neighborhoods, right? We're going to really make an effort for it to be supportive. And the other parts of the infrastructure weren't there, right? So opening a restaurant, it's risky, it's expensive, right? You can't just be a Black person or a brown person who's good at cooking and open a restaurant, right? So we had this opportunity of, several of these liquor licenses literally going from 2,500 to being worth 500,000 in the process of an hour, right? Of being given it. And, I think that's just one small example of how our ecosystem can actually become infrastructure, working with private, state, city, to look at a problem and say, okay, we're going to make sure that Black and brown people get liquor licenses in our opening restaurants, and it's not just META, right? That we have more than one META happening from this success.
Another important lever for government and corporations is doing a better job of using minority suppliers. And this has come up in the Q&A as well. And I was hoping John and Bea, you could talk about this. John, what the city is doing to improve its record. I know it's not where it needs to be, but you have made some progress. And Bea, if you could talk about the Chamber and the Pacesetters initiative. John, go ahead. You start us off on that.
Yeah, no, thanks, Shirley. And what government does and how government conducts business is a super important part of the ecosystem that Malia was just referring to, right? So our policies that allow people to play is critical, right? So the liquor licenses is super important, right? So as soon as Mayor Walsh came in and we came in as administration, we jumped on Ayana's legislation and the work that you guys were doing, Malia, and said, let's go, right? Help to push. And then we quickly came back and say, all right, what went well in that first round? What can we do better now, right? And what we recognized was in some neighborhoods like Mattapan, the ecosystem for entrepreneurship in the space wasn't ready. So how do we allow them to be ready to take advantage of something like that? And so now in our second legislation that I'm shamelessly putting the plug in here for everybody to go back, what happens is the liquor licenses will sit on the shelf for that neighborhood. Mattapan does not have to race and compete with JP. There will be liquor licenses for Mattapan in this new liquor license bill, if in fact it passes. So I want to say what government does in helping that ecosystem move forward and be ready for our brown and Black entrepreneurs matter. Hence, doing business with them, right? Our ability to provide contracts, allow our brown and Black businesses to do business with us creates wealth, helps to support businesses. We know in the history of the United States, government's participation with small businesses has done wonders for businesses and their growth. So in Boston, the last couple of decades have been horrific, right? The percentages of small businesses doing business with the city is ridiculous. And in fact, ever since the program was knocked down in 2003, we've been able to account for 1% every year, right? Most recently, what we've done to help really sort of move the numbers there is both look at our internal operation and what we can do, and look at externally what we need to change legislatively to do more, right? So internally, what we've done is change how we do business. The mayor signed an executive order, and through that executive order, we've been changing this machine. And so now the mayor has mandated, in fact, that all our departments affirmatively market. When you are marketing certain opportunities, there is a certain way we're going to do it at the City of Boston to make sure, in fact, that it is fair, that everybody knows about it, that people know what the opportunities are. And then the other thing that we're doing is we now have launched clinics. It shouldn't be a mystery of how you do business with the city. So we've launched clinics to say, here is how you would respond to a bid. Here are the different components of it. Here's what's coming up, right? Not going to be, you shouldn't know 30 days before something comes up. In fact, we plan on putting out a bid book every year. Here is what we're going to be spending on paper. Here is what we're going to be spending on cleaning contracts, et cetera. So we're building up to that, but removing and making it transparent, critical. Affirmative marketing, as I talked about, is important, but one of the other things that we're really weak on is having people certify. We need our brown and black businesses certified. I know it's a big paper lift. I know it's a lot of documents. We haven't done well on it. We haven't done well because there haven't been incentives, right? And so that leads me to the disparity study. We need to have goals set up for the city of Boston that allows for incentives for people to come in and certify with us so that we can, in fact, affirmatively market to folks who are out there and make sure that those opportunities are available. I'm happy to say, and I'm going to knock on wood, cross my fingers, and do everything that we are going to have the disparity study complete this December and make sure that we are moving in that direction. It is critical. It's going well so far, hasn't been deterred by COVID. I was worried in terms of when you talk nitty gritty, Shirley, the COVID pandemic is hitting our brown and black businesses more. And that might lessen the number of brown and black businesses that we count in our universe, which would lessen the gap of disparity that we count. And so the Disparity Study Advisory Committee that the mayor has appointed is concerned about this. We're talking about it with our consultants, and we're going to make sure that we get the right data on this to set up the right infrastructure for the city. Now, meanwhile, we're now doing a better job of pushing out more businesses to brown and black businesses in the city of Boston. Our numbers are up. We still got a lot of work to do, but we're now at 7%. After we can count all of the businesses that the state has also certified and the city certified, we can now recognize more businesses. And in our COVID spend, it was up to 33%. Now, granted, most of that was one business. It was actually an Asian business, Shirley, out of Woburn, who did a bunch of, who bought all of our Chromebooks for us and for BPS, right? But making sure that we are being attentive and we're paying attention to this and we're driving up the numbers. And I'm here to say, and I'm going to predict that our numbers are going to continue to be up. So next quarter, our number is going to be up again because we're driving this and we're heading in the right direction. We've got a lot of work to do. So I'm not here to start the party yet, right? But we're heading in the right direction.
Thank you, John. And I feel the same. I think a key word that I want to emphasize is transparency. So the city of Boston is doing their contracting clinics, and at the chamber, we're launching our Doing Business series. We're asking our corporations to show us their process. Too often, many of the rules are way too prohibitive. And I'll be honest, it feels too hard to do business, and it shouldn't be that way. I want to be able to showcase what it is, what does it take for a business of color to bid for an RFP, and I want them to be fully prepared when they make their pitch. So we're putting more pressure on our companies to say, this is what's coming up the pipeline. This is what we're looking for. That way the connections are clear. And one other thing that we're trying to emphasize is top leadership and engagement. I'm really happy that we have top leaders like Malia Lazu at Berkshire Bank, who's part of the program, and Quincy Miller, because they know what it takes to have company-wide buy-in in terms of the procurement process. We need a new set of rules because too often procurement means low-risk, multi-year deals with just a few companies, but supplier diversity asks for the complete opposite of that. So we need to really address systemic barriers in this way by asking for a new set of rules and a new set of engaging. And I think transparency is the key part of that. So the Doing Business series will launch on August 26th with Gil Bain, which is a building company, and I know that there will be a lot of interesting. And we will continue to do that. We will ask each of our companies who participate as part of the Pacesetters program to be clear about what their expectations are, to be honest about what's coming up, and to show us their numbers year by year through a critical data collection process as well.
Yeah, on your Pacesetters initiative, I remember there was the chamber had an earlier event this year, right? About, and there was some discussion about Pacesetters, and it seems like, and I was just wondering, have you found that, since George Floyd, since the protests, have you gotten more interest in that program? I mean, how do you, I mean, and I think what struck me about the program is that there were a lot of small business owners who wanted to be part of it, or they thought it would be, a lot of them didn't have access to it either, or they didn't get as much work as they wanted out of it from some of the companies. And if you could talk a little bit about, you know, we know what the city's numbers are, their track record, but what are the corporation's track record in terms of doing business with minority-owned businesses?
Absolutely. Well, to be clear, Shirley, the program launched in 2018. And since then, around 60 deals have been made. And we know that that's a fraction of what we want to see done. So we're asking for more and way more. And I think one of the ways is by creating a transparent process. I think, again, the procurement industry has relied on rules that supplier diversity doesn't even make sense to them. So we want to push on that. And the other thing that I want to make a connection with is corporations' DEI goals. So very often we see that supplier diversity and the procurement office isn't always tied to DEI goals across the board. But when that connection is made, it becomes a clear target, and there's actually a plan put in place to make that happen. So that's another aspect that we're looking at, and making sure that procurement is seen as an equity tool, something that will help us change some of those numbers and really help us break through the inequalities that we're seeing, not only in our city, but across the state. So those are the questions that we're starting to ask. I think CEO engagement is very critical. We know that when CEOs are involved in the process and really make this a priority across their company, and the procurement officer has much more power to really think about and be held accountable to what deals they decide on. So that's one of the things that we're starting to do. You ask about momentum. I would say absolutely, there is more momentum, and I really want to make sure that it's not just a trend, that this is something that continues beyond this year. So yes, continue building pressure, continue asking the right questions. For all of those listening, ask your employers what your metrics are year by year. Ask them what they're doing on their supplier diversity spend. When we begin to ask those questions, then an answer has to come. And I think that's what's going to help the chamber really make the case for inclusion.
What's your sense now of corporations, how much they rely on diversity suppliers? Is it a small, and what should be the goal in terms of percentage?
Can I just jump in there?
Malia.
And jump in. Quincy actually talks about the numbers, and so Quincy, please correct me in the closing comments, but I think he talked about that it's around 3% of spend. So 97% of spends aren't. And so if you can get if you can double your efforts, we're still going to be at 6%. I mean, we're talking about pennies here. And, I think when we talk about vendor relationships, I want to get back to a point that Nia made, because it's one of those things, I think Kenya, did it best in Black AF, right? Like every episode was because of slavery, right? Like you cannot ignore the institutional, systemic, and implicit bias that every business of color faces, that every business owner of color faces, and that every business owners generationally have faced to get to this point. And so, what I would say is that our numbers are way lower than we would give ourselves credit for. They reflect where our relationship sits in companies. And so the best way to undo that, and this is going to make it sound easy, and part of it is to decide that every new spend, right? So you may have multi-year contracts, right? You may not be able to get out of everything, but like for us, when we started building Revex Labs, of which, we're building multiple throughout our footprint, we said that we were going to try to do 100% of that build out was going to be people of color. And we were able to do a huge chunk of it. We had one thing, which was our signage, that I now have people identified for. So that's not going to happen again. And we did that within a matter of 2-3 months, right? If you have the relationships, finding vendors that can build something as beautiful as Rebex Labs in Nubian Square, you should check it out, quickly can happen, right? So, I think it's one of these things where we just believe it to be hard, but it just ain't so to get started. Now, maybe to get to some real numbers, but why don't we just say, let's get up to 6%. Let's just double it, right? And that's how we can start getting there. And then you have the relationships, and that becomes much, much easier, but all the implicit institutional and structural deficiencies, all those assumptions that Nia was talking about, hits up against vendor procurement as well.
So Malia, let me jump in here because this is super important, right? It would be game changing to have a public racial compact on procurement, right? Let's go public with this. I love what you're saying here, right? Let's all go in, right? City, corporations. Let's talk about new effort publicly, some goals that we can strive to about what we're going to do around procurement and move the needle. I mean, you're right. If we went from 3% to 6%, game changer, right? Particularly in the private sector where all the money's being spent, right? We should hold city accountable because that's our taxpayer dollars, and we need to go hard on that. If we move the public sector, we're making real change.
Great. I'm going to try to move into questions from our audience. And there are a bunch of questions about, what can I do? What can I do? If I'm someone who wants to hire businesses owned by people of color, is there a directory? Is there an effort? Someone even suggested, what about if chambers of commerce, put together like a pooled gift card, allow purchasers to shop at Black and brown establishments throughout the city and state. Anyways, from your point of view, what is something that someone can go back and do today, or take it back to their companies? Like, we should think about this.
Shirley, I'm going to jump in because I know everyone's going to have great ideas. So my one idea is to decide to buy something for people of color for this year. So whether it's we're going to buy all the paper, all the toilet paper, all the ink, but just pick something and figure out how to do that once. But before you do that, and this is really the important part that we skip over, which is to skip over, this history, which is to say, why didn't you have it in the first place? What was it that had you have 97% of your spend be white? Because that's the question, that question is where the bias sits. And the answer to that question is going to inform whether you're actually going to have impact. And, to John's point about us all coming together, we can and we should reflect on this, but it doesn't mean that we have to flog ourselves, right? It's about coming in and saying, this is messed up. It's been historically messed up. It shouldn't have taken an 8-minute and 46-second video of a man being publicly lynched screaming for his mother for us to now figure out who we buy paper from. So when you ask yourself, why didn't I do that before? That answer is going to help you live out all the amazing solutions you're going to hear from the rest of the panel.
And I'd like to follow up from that because I think I'm just going to build on what Malia said. And Malia, thank you so much for this response and your previous response. So I don't know if you can tell, but I'm kind of a keywords person. I don't know where that came from, but I am. So a word that I'm picking out from Malia's response is decision. And so really owning, as Malia has said, our decisions and our choices. And so I think that means moving away from, and as Malia said, without flogging ourselves, that's not helpful. So owning our decisions, owning our choices, not making excuses for them. So really, again, undertaking that examination, undertaking that reflection, arriving at an honest answer. And as Malia said, that's fundamental. That's got to happen. Every individual, every group, every organization, every corporation has to, I would say, in good faith, undergo that process. And then building on this notion of, if I'm just a regular person, what do I do right now? I would say building on supporting a business of color, I would also say think of coordination. So I think one of the things, going back to the importance of relationships and the way that we worked together during the pandemic, which by the way, we're still in. So I think we should say that. We are still in a pandemic. It is not over. We are reopening in the midst of a pandemic. So that should be clear. It's not done. But one of the things in addition to working together is also coordinating so that our efforts make sense. It doesn't make sense if everybody purchases from the same Black business that everyone's talking about. So it doesn't make sense if there's one restaurant or one organization that's gotten flooded with resources. That's not helpful to communities of color overall. It's not helpful to the ecosystem. So I would also say be creative in your friend groups, in your social networks, in your communities, in terms of coordinating what that support looks like. And I would also say understand that some of that support is going to mean just realistically, because again, we are still in a pandemic, not necessarily purchasing a product, but maybe you're actually just donating. Maybe it is a gift card. Maybe you understand, and I think maybe it was John who said this. When we're talking about an entrepreneur, we're talking about a person. So we're talking about a person who has a family, who lives in a community. It's not just about that business. So understanding that in supporting that entrepreneur and supporting that business, you're also supporting other people, you're supporting families. So it doesn't mean that the only reason to support them is you get something in return. You support them because we're all suffering right now. Our fates are intertwined. We cannot get away from that. And if there are those of us who are not able to independently resource ourselves, we should be able to get help from our fellow community members. And so I would say the coordination would involve that too. Really quickly, there are a few directories. They're different. UDEMA has one that's the businesses that's in our network. It's small. BECMA has a much larger directory. We've partnered with YW on a Black business directory. There are a bunch of directories and apps that are out there. Temple Israel, we've also partnered with on their directory, and they have a Shook. So there are lots of different. I think I'm saying that correctly. There are lots of different efforts to tap into, and so I think that's a place that one can get. Those places are where people can get started. And I think again, what's really important is the coordination.
All right, I'm going to go on to another question we kept on getting from the audience, which is, as Nia pointed out, we are still in a pandemic and for some time, but is anyone starting to look ahead and what are there resources being created specifically for minority sustainability and recovery, and how do we make sure that they survive past 2021, past 2022, however long this pandemic lasts?
Can you repeat the question? Oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, John. You understood the question, go ahead.
You want to rephrase that question, Shirley, and then I'll jump in?
I think it's a, everyone has talked about what are we doing now, right, to help entrepreneurs of color survive. And so that's helping them just get up and going or just make it past the next few months. But what about long term? What is being done long term to make sure they last for years and they're around for years?
Yeah, there's a couple of different things I want to jump in on. And one is what we're doing now, I think, should translate long term. So here's a couple of different things. We have temporary extensions of premises to allow outdoor dining and accommodate businesses in a different way. Look, that part of it needs to stay. We need to figure out, in fact, how we are providing our small businesses more capacity in general, particularly our food industry. Look, I don't need to tell you guys, our accommodation and food industry is our third largest employer in the city, third or fourth. They're a big part of our tourism industry. They're a big part of our neighborhoods job sector. And they're getting crushed, right? 33% of the unemployment claims right now are coming from that sector. So helping our small businesses, our neighborhood restaurants, are critical. And I think that, the temporary extension of premise needs to be part of a long-term policy. I think how we think about what gets delivered in the delivery system is critical. If you're a business right now and you're not online, super important for us to rectify that. If you don't have a digital footprint, we've got to rectify that, and you've got to be able to think about delivery in a more critical, sustainable way. It's here to stay. Logistics matter for your business. So I can go on, Shirley, but I think it has to be tied to the things we're doing for COVID right now should translate to permanent, because they're just good ways for us to build a stronger business ecosystem.
There are a lot of questions from the audience about how nonprofits and bigger companies, how can they make money available to support Black and Brown communities in the Commonwealth, and I guess also Black and Brown entrepreneurs. Talk a little bit, I think there's been little bits of that here and there, but if everyone wants to speak to that.
I can get started on that. As John said, as someone who 3 years ago would not have thought that I was going to be coming from a bank position, from being on the organizing side. I think what I see now in this corporate space is that relationships with nonprofits and with foundations and with social responsible investors and with the city can help us mitigate risk, right? And that's all, especially from a bank, but that's all businesses want to do, right? And so if you're talking about asking me to do something new, like for example, here at the bank, we're talking about entering these new markets. And so the how we do that matters. And we can't just assume that because we're talking to someone who has brown skin or whatever, that we're talking to, the next Black Bill Gates in the making, right? Like that's not necessarily true. And it's also not true that none of them are the next Black Bill Gates in the making, right? So when you build those relationships, you're able to understand trends, you're able to understand momentum. I think Bea or Nia mentioned, how well do you know this market, right? It's those types of understandings and clarity that help you give character loans, that help you do things that seem more risky without actually the risk. The second thing that I will say is around capital. What we have found is that we have some social responsible investors that are national, that are into what we're doing. And so they're helping by buying bank products in high numbers, right? So they're coming in and saying, we're going to give you some real deposits, right? As a way to back up what you're doing. And in the beginning, until you get the numbers right, that type of support, for a foundation or for a donor to decide, okay, we're going to move a huge chunk of our account to you because you're doing this. That again helps mitigate the risk. And I think, our product like Friends and Family really allows for that. So we're doing community underwriting from the community, all relationship driven. And then we also have this CD product that allows higher net worth individuals or anyone who wants a CD to park their money in support of these loans we're doing through community underwriting.
I think, Malia, it makes a lot of sense. I would love to think about how we do some kind of a blended fund that would allow city investments and philanthropic investments to mitigate the risks that you would have through your commercial loans, right? And then potentially take down the interest rates because of it, right? And really make it accessible. I'd love that idea. I think there are other models in the real estate space that have done that, but in the small business lending space, I haven't seen that. And I think Boston should pioneer that. Love that idea. I'd love to work with you on that.
Great. Me, you, and Quincy will grab some Zoom drinks next week.
Right. We are down to our last minute, and I want to thank our panelists, John and Nia and Bea and Malia, and Quincy will close us out.
Great. Thank you very much, Shirley. And I also want to echo thank you to today's panelists for sharing their stories and their guidance. But most importantly, thank you to all of our town hall participants. for the candor in your questions, and for showing up today because you want to make a change. Ultimately affecting significant and lasting change is going to depend upon behavior changes that we all make. Public, we heard it today, public, private, and individuals coming together, an entire ecosystem to take purposeful and specific investments in support of our Black and brown businesses. I hope that you all leave here today with ideas on how you can help our entrepreneurs of color and our local economy thrive, but don't let those good intentions go to waste. Commit to taking action today. Thank you all so much for joining us, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.